what we're going to do now is go to the audience to see if they have any questions.
I don't know where to start really, but I love Alex's point about the Consumer Protection Act. I know Simon's here from ICO, but I can remember the days when telephones had a green dot on them to say they were safe to use on the internet. I know that most homes have consumer devices in there, like LG TVs, which track which channel you're on and who's in the room, so they sell the information on your tastes to the advertisers to get targeted advertising. I mean, that's happening in UK homes now. BLE beacons are going into shopping malls and whatever. Are we at the point where regulation actually ought to be approved devices, UL badges ought to include the privacy aspect of the devices themselves? I think it's an interesting concept now.
Well, I mean, I think I'd agree with you. You have to sort of do the green spot thing, as it were. But that's about, a lot of that, as you remember, was about device interaction and interconnection. I think the debate we had earlier, which I think is really key, and where we do, I think, need to look at it and see if a more appropriate either legislation, regulation, or certainly a charter, because to drive the businesses concerned to do the right thing with the data that's being gathered and so on, because you just don't know, to your point, if you're walking through a store with a whole bunch of iBeacons, you know, how's that data being used? What I want is a very clear contract with the people that might be using that information, that transparency. So I know if they provide iBeacons in the store, so it can lead me to the right thing at the right time, or give me an offer, then I see a value proposition on that. If they go away and then sell that data to someone I don't want it to go to, then I feel like it's been misused. So I think there is scope for codes of conduct, but code of conduct I don't think probably strong enough legislation, regulation to drive people in the right direction.
I've seen some really good stuff from Ofcom recently on which should be consumer education about how to safely use mobile phones, for example. The ICO site, in terms of the privacy law, is very, very usable. And at the 5G event 2 weeks ago, they were talking about the tactile internet as their goal, which is exactly where you're coming to, that we are interfacing with what will be the smart internet. But we need to trust the devices, and that's, I don't see happening at all.
There's a complication there that's one that's tied to how the manufacturing of products happens. So just as an example, I bought a washing machine. It was a new washing machine. It came with an app that allowed me to control my washing machine. I was very excited. I downloaded the app, and it turns out, of course, that it doesn't work on my version of my iPhone, because the washing machine was probably designed about 4 years ago in order to exist in my home for the next 10 years. And this was a sort of nice to have add-on, well, you don't know what we're going to do about this. And so there's a lack of sort of real investment from manufacturers who are just waiting. And I think if there are things like regulation in place and standards in place when it comes to sort of consumer standards, as it were, then it may or may not give them some comfort that there is a guideline there. They know what to do, they know how to approach the investments in these types of technologies. Because there's a big difference between how a consumer sees a wearable type device, which might be thrown away in 6 months, and a piece of infrastructure in a home that's expected to last for 10 years. And I think they haven't quite figured out how they're going to make those investments, even from a sort of, consumer standpoint. If you're looking to make something smart that you're retailing for £600 versus very, very high-end consumers who, will always be happy to pay more, but there's just less of them. So the investments in terms of manufacturing and the experience that people are expected to have over 10 years, I think will also shape those regulatory conversations. So not only do you have to provide a certain level of support from day one, but it has to continue throughout the life of the product. I don't think manufacturers are ready for this. Cloud companies would be more equipped to handle this, and so maybe there are conversations that both of those industries need to have, because essentially it's saying if washing machine company X deals with cloud service company Y, it's saying, I need you to support all the data around all my washing machines for the next 50 years. And, you know, no one's had to think about things in those terms right now.
And I think it's interesting there's an opportunity for both BCS and dare I say, larger corporations, because that's what they do. They've been thinking about those things for some time. There was a very good article in Forbes talking about 4 things which block the internet, most Internet of Things or potential barriers, most of which would cover the standards of privacy and blah, blah. The first one, he talked about, to use your sort of example, that a coffee machine. I want a coffee machine just to make coffee for me in the morning.
Yeah.
I don't want to be sitting there waiting for the next download because the software download is and it's just too smart for its own good. So for me, back to the BCS angle here, it's about our people who are fellows and members of the BCS should be thinking about those design issues, those longevity issues, those operational issues as part of their their design makeup.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the washing machine app is only useful if it enables a robot to unload it and load it for you.
I know. Sadly, there was a Radio 4 show just this morning about the gender balance in home activities. So,
Yes, well, that's what I'm saying. Replace
Usually
that whole
there'll be
argument with a robot.
someone somewhere will be taking out the washing, but
Any other questions, folks? Yes.
I was interested in what Alexandra was saying about the past being the intranet of things and now the Internet of Things. As someone who designed security and file systems a long time ago on the internet to monitor from the company, all of those sensors had to be as cheap as possible. So they didn't have anything in them that dealt with the security element or the privacy element. And I still think that's a big problem when it comes to using them on the internet. It's a much bigger problem, and you need to spend that money. What's your view on what's happening there and what standards there might be for that?
Your point is very well made that a lot of the reasons a lot of these SCADA-type systems were on private networks was because the devices were too expensive anyway, and was security on being more so. And there's an awful lot of security by obscurity. And we've been involved with one of our business partners, Eurotech, on helping to secure SCADA networks post 9/11, when people suddenly realised it wasn't satisfactory to have the security by obscurity for the system which was controlling the power supply to a city or the water supply to a city, and putting proper VPN networks around those Modbus type protocols to secure them. Because those technologies do exist, and the onus is on us as designers to make sure that we put the right protection on the right data from the right point in the network. For example, the wind speed from my weather station at home, you're perfectly welcome to. You can read that till the cows come home. But if it's my financial transaction, my house is going out to buy 2 kilowatt hours of electricity to run the washing machine, and it's negotiated a good price, I want that to be secure. So that part of the transaction has to be secure, so the mechanisms have to be in place for the right part of the data at the right time.
I think for someone who's investing a large quantity of hardware, so deployments inside buildings to monitor, a number of different things. I think it's a sales question, which is to say, are you happy paying less and being exposed, or are you, and these things could happen, and being at a place, and I don't know who's in charge of making that sale, apart from whoever's in charge of purchasing, who has a budget and who's limited by their budget. But it's that uncomfortable conversation, because more and more of even the hacker-maker hardware and the way in which electronics are being designed have encryption sort of baked in, as it were, in the hardware, which is exciting because it means that people are thinking about that even when they're making LEDs blink for their cat. But I think that if that scaremongering becomes too strong, which is to say, like, oh, this is, all these things could go wrong with connectivity, then no one will invest at all, or people will just stay with legacy hardware that they've invested in 20 years ago. I think it's a tricky one, and I suspect that companies like IBM are better at making the case for smarter and bigger and well-supported systems than smaller providers and smaller clients who essentially have a catalog of RS components or other providers are available. And going, okay, well, what's, what have I got? Wi-Fi chip, okay, we'll take this one, that's it. And so at what point does the purchase decision occur, I think is also quite a tricky one to even design for and talk about, because it might be an engineer on staff, or it might be a large, service provision, so.
I've got a question on the kind of the human side of things, because it's relatively easy to get data from devices and getting them, and we've talked about how Internet of Things will allow that to happen. But at the other end, if we think about in a healthcare setting, which IoT is a fantastic opportunity, but at the other end with the caregivers and doctors who are doing all this monitoring, healthcare at the moment is I suppose you describe it as a transactional relationship between the patient and the caregiver, the doctor. And we're kind of suggesting that they will have access to all this data about us, that it's instantly available to them. Do you feel that that will be perhaps overwhelming to those people receiving that information and therefore might hinder adoption?
There's more information at the point where it matters, I think will be what happens. I don't think, and to your point, I agree, I don't think that they will sort of have this ongoing flow of information unless it's critical. So this person is being monitored for falls. If they fall, something should happen within 20 minutes. And those systems will be put in place with emergency care, with social care, with whoever's in charge more directly of that person. But sort of your average GP, for them to receive a whole bunch of information about all of their patients, will just be like, whatever. But at the point at which they have that 10 minutes, they'll be more equipped to have a more granular conversation about that patient than now, when they think, how many days since this or that happened? I don't know, I can't remember. Whereas now it'll be there, it'll be present. So I think it will enhance that experience and possibly make that 10-minute window more productive and enable them to take better decisions.
And the other thing we're going to see is greater use of analytics, so that those data streams can be coming in, not going to land on a doctor's desk, but they'll be sitting in some cloud-hosted environment where analytics is happening, looking for anomalous behaviour, or arrhythmia, or just something unusual happening, or something which, when it happened previously with other patients, it led to some problem happening. And that's the point at which it raises an actionable insight to the doctor to say, maybe you should call in Mrs. Smith for a checkup, or maybe send an air ambulance out now because it's going to be really bad, or whatever it is. We did a project in the US with St. Jude Medical Centre, where you had a heart rate monitor, more than heart rate, a heart monitor, and it would dial in back to the hospital to send the data. And as long as it was okay, some definition of okay, nothing happened with the data. But as soon as there was something slightly odd detected, it would immediately raise an email to the doctor, and they could decide, they could bring up the JPEG and have a look at the graph and decide what action to take.
Yeah, I just to build on slightly different, because I can only use the example in the earlier. This is about getting the right information at the right time, so you can make the most efficient uses of resources. Right through to you're seeing some of these A&E cases in the so-called golden hour after an accident, where sensors in the car can give the ambulance and the surgeons information about what impacts happen, how it's happened, in order to influence and get a better outcome. So for me, it's actually a boon. I don't see doctors having to sit there with an endless stream. The whole point is, with decent design, again, where BCS and IT professionals should work, is good design, use of analytics, so you can get the right people to the right place, at the right time, and get a far more efficient, health service. Health professionals are run off the feet, as we all know. They do a great job. So we ought to be using this thing to make life better for them and patients, rather than making it certainly a burden in terms of deluge of information.
Hi there, Dr. Leonard Anderson, Kamuri, startup founder, entrepreneur. The problem I have got at the moment is skills. We need electronics engineers, production engineers, we need protocol converters, we need web servers, we need predictive analytics, we want to dispose, we want smartphone applications. I need 10 people, right? What could BCS perhaps give a framework for people? So, well, there are these 10 things you need, and this is where to get them from. At the moment, I'm struggling with things like IoT London and making people doing networking. It can be done, but would it not be much simpler if there was some, BCS sort of, this is where you can go to get started. We know you need 10 people, and there we can find 8 of them you're short of.
I mean, I'm not sure that BCS necessarily is a recruitment agency, but I made the point earlier, and I think I agree with you. I do agree with you. There is clearly, in general, a lack of skills, available skills, and this is something that BCS should be looking at and looking to drive. On the Entrepreneurs Group, we are working with incubators and accelerators, understanding what a CTO in residence, understanding the skills and the capabilities, those incubators and accelerators, which anybody can join. They're open to everybody, recognising that BCS is an open institute driving forward the profession generally and the economy generally, which is where we're coming from. I'd be delighted obviously to talk if you've got some specific areas that are not being covered, because we very much want to address those side of things. But I think generally speaking, getting the right skills to drive all this forward, to do the right design, the user design, the safety design, the fault tolerant design, for all these things is really, really vital part of what BCS should be providing to the IoT party.
Most of what we've heard today, we've been talking about data moving from A to B and then analytics being performed on it. Is there any examples out there of actually keeping data at the device end and actually doing it in reverse so that the data doesn't move anywhere, which might have more value in terms of privacy and security, and also against data aggregation, which in the long term is where we're heading?
We're starting to see that with, for example, energy monitoring systems in the homes, which act more holistically within the house to interact between smart appliances and the occupants of the house, and say the electric vehicle and the drive, to make localized decisions, but takes data feeds in from National Grid, from the weather forecast, from what houses in the near vicinity in the community are doing, to make a more globally optimal decision relative to the local decision that's been made within the house. So we are seeing that, and we're going to see it more and more.
Yeah, I mean, the other, your mobile phone has got lots of sensors on it and does lots of processing, pre-processing and so on. So in one sense, without being overly glib, you could say that's a place where lots of that kind of stuff's going. Certainly, the home is one that's already been mentioned, right through to. That was a great example, but also right down to the safety aspect of this. So, for example, I think people were very concerned that if you had a boiler, you don't want to be sending information up to some central point to decide whether this is unsafe or not, and hoping the message to shut down now comes through on the basis that might not get through or might not happen quick enough, and someone could get hurt. So you need to do a whole bunch of local decisions as well as the metro and wider scale decisions.
I think it's down to design, but that also has an impact on retail, because of course the more power you put into something, the more localized power, the more expensive the device becomes. When it comes to the Goodnight lamp, the way in which we've designed it is that even if connectivity isn't available, the lamp should just work, which is kind of an easy one. But in so many, back to your coffee example, in so many cases, if there's something wrong with the connectivity aspect of it, the object sort of loses its function, and that's, demented, because all you want is a cup of coffee. And just because your app doesn't connect to it doesn't mean you should be shut from the experience of having a cup of coffee. And so it's down to, I think, design and, again, interaction design of how we decide to interact with the consumer, and for designers to understand what are some of the technical limitations, because what can be done, what can't be done, when should a firmware update occur, not in the morning probably if you're doing an object that's going to be used in the morning. And these things, I think, To your point about mobile phones, people have often built what they call accessories, which is often a device that essentially depends on a mobile phone, the mobile phone's presence to be there. So the intelligence kind of stays within the phone. Again, you know, you're perfectly right in that, what the hell does that mean? Because that's connected to everything else. But if we replace the phone with a hub or with something that wasn't connected to the internet but did have that local intelligence, then we can build sort of cheap services that stay local. I think it's possible. It's just a case of applying common sense as well.
Yeah, and aeroplanes, I mean, you can't argue that there's a whole bunch of stuff that's going on in an aeroplane, as well as all the things Rolls-Royce and other engine manufacturers are available, sending information about, you know, how they're doing through satellites and so on. So if you look at that kind of example, there's internal things that are happening based on the sensors. Right through to stuff in the global ecosystem, so the transport system and the airline can run more efficiently, and the customers can get a better passenger experience.
Chris Yap, the issue, I want to broaden the issue of skills in here, and I'll just use the medical example, but I could elsewhere. How many people in the UK actually have the experimental design skills and the health analytics skills to be able to meet this vision? And how many do we need? And how long is it going to create a cohort so that we do it? And I was looking at some of these, I was in Italy earlier in the week, talking to medics, and one of the key problems is to get the vision. We've got to redesign the entire health pathway, because at the moment it's the heart person, it's the cancer person. When you start doing health analytics in a serious way, we're going to need an awful lot of people who have data expertise, design expertise, and they aren't coming out of our universities, and they aren't part of the health basic doctor training yet. Now, given the time it's going to take to create those qualifications, get them validated, get the research, we could see that skill base in terms of the user community, especially the building community, could be the single biggest drag on the uptake and the time to deliver this vision. And the question is, where is that work going on, if you like, to try to bridge and actually get us some serious professional insight?
I think, if anything, it's happening within incubators. So what would typically happen if someone at the minute has a good idea is that they will be hosted inside an incubator, and then, as Leonard has been doing, try to meet everyone possible. So a young project in Shoreditch at the minute is called Andiamo, and what they do is 3D printed braces on demand. They scan children with disabilities, and they make a 3D printed brace for them. And they have gone through 2 incubators now, trying to find all the people that they do need to talk to the health organizations that they need to connect with, to find the professionals that they need to connect with, because they're supported by an incubator environment that allows them to not have to have a day job and to just spend their time essentially networking. I don't think that anybody is, certainly not in education, is providing a inclusive enough networking platform, so a space where students from Imperial College, Royal College of Art, and Middlesex University can meet and come up with ideas together and actually invest in a relationship together. And I think that's down to either students not wanting to have a startup as the first sort of, after school thing that they do, but more and more do, and more take that path. So I think it's very ad hoc at the minute. It's unscalable, of course. I think it's something that academia should really own up to the realization that even if you're in a silo right now in your industry, and there is an industry there for you to find employment, in the future you will need to collaborate with others to solve some of these problems. And that's difficult, I think, and I think BCS is in a position to help.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe it's something we should be considering. I mean, from a BCS viewpoint, I'm not sure if you're aware, and slight advertorial, one of the things we have been doing is we're now launching the second technology startup school dedicated to the health sector. That's in collaboration with Tech UK. It's about to start in 2 or 3 weeks' time. If you're an entrepreneur, you have a good idea, and most of the first cohort were people with a health background looking to get some help on the technology and funding side. That's exactly what that school's designed to do, and that incubator accelerator. It's not got limitless spaces, but it's, as it were, we're learning from it and taking a start. I think the point you made is a kind of wider policy point, which I take on board about when you look at a health value chain and the silos in it, how can we find ways and means of unpicking that, making that more efficient for all involved. Because I'm coming from an entrepreneurial base, I would back entrepreneurs who could see this as an opportunity, a real pain point, and come into the ecosystem and drive it forward. I think that would be the top-down or bottom-up, whichever way you want to look at it. And maybe there is the need for looking at kind of a wider policy thing in academia with BCS to drive. This is what life will look like in the next 5, 10 years, and these are the skills we're likely to meet. It's notoriously tough, of course, because today's world moves so quickly, and I'm not making an excuse necessarily at all for BCS, but things like even data scientists and things weren't talked about relatively recently and so on. So it's a great point, and certainly if you've got some good health ideas, I would encourage you, and please take a look at the BCS Tech UK Health Tech Startup School, because we'd be delighted to have and help entrepreneurs on their way.
Yeah, can I just chip in there? I mean, Paul mentioned CTOs in residence. I'm piloting that role at IDEA London, which is an incubator with UCL, who have a huge medical facility, just won a Nobel Prize, with Cisco and DC Thompson. I also judged the BCS Awards on Friday. 2 of the finalists there were in the medical sector, in IoT medical area. We had an awards day yesterday at IDEA London, and two of the startups there. One was heavily funded, I think 10 investors out of the private medical community, with a totally different agenda to the other one, which was out of the NHS community. So a huge amount of activity, but the resources that I've been trying to use within BCS, I meet with all the CTOs from the startups. There's something like 17 startups now. On a monthly meeting, we identify technology areas where they need specific support, and then I resource that, if I can, from specialists within the 76,000 BCS members. And we're starting to get a mechanism going on that, aren't we, Paul? So I think that it will develop, but it's early days. And if we have...
It's a good challenge, isn't it? So that's the sort of thing that we're looking to put in place. On the one final thing, advertorial, 12th of November, in conjunction with the CDE Catapult, we're doing a session covering security, Internet of Things, and cloud-based startups. Again, looking to help any entrepreneur who's got an idea in an open way, with mentoring advice, funding advice, that kind of stuff, all to act what BCS should be doing, which is helping, supporting, engaging the ecosystem to make people successful.